Well, there was a time when sitting this close to my guest would have made me nervous. And she knows it's true. The reality today is that here at 100 Huntley Street, we can't get enough of Carol Kornacki. Your response has been the same, so our Truth to Go teacher this month is here to get acquainted. Carol, you've been a guest on so many Christian programs. We've had you here and actually repeated a program when you were here on Full Circle. We always get huge response. Your life has touched just about every awful thing that could destroy a person.
Absolutely.
Hard to believe looking at you today.
People say that. My testimony was on YouTube, and somebody wrote on the YouTube, she doesn't look like somebody beat up and walking the streets and drug addicted. So when God makes a transformation, you know, he does it all the way, doesn't he?
He does. A name, ordinary name, Linda Smith, June 1980, took a chance on you. She actually saved a seat for you in a church service. When we hear your story, we need to recap because some are meeting you for the first time. It's surprising that you would ever even darken the doors of a church.
Well, you know that I came from a childhood that was extremely violent. There was bloodshed. My father was mentally ill. He hung himself in the cellar and kicked the chair and then managed to get down and come upstairs. There was and show us the marks on his neck. My mother had absolutely no use for her children. She had 10 children, came out of that woman's womb, and she had absolutely no love for any of them. In fact, most of the time, the way she showed love was by slapping you or hitting you or yelling at you or correcting you. And I listened my whole life to expressions like, I never wanted you. You're not like the rest of the kids. I never loved you. I had children to help me around the house. So in the midst of this kind of tongue lashing, in the midst of violence in the home, drunkenness, alcoholism, adultery, sexual abuse, in all of this, I started from a very young age to have a hate growing in me, boy. There was a hate in me. And I thought, I'm going to get out of here just as quick as I can. And I watched my brothers and sisters from the oldest all the way down the line make their exit. And when I decided I was going to get out, it was going to be through pregnancy. So I was promiscuous, found myself pregnant, and I went to my mother one day and I said, you hit me, you hurt me, I hate it here. My father was locked up in a mental institution at the time. I am leaving, and you can't hit me anymore because I'm pregnant. I'm leaving.
That was retaliation. That was in your face, Mom, that pregnancy.
And you didn't do that with my mother, because my mother left marks across my face. Whenever I would ask her, why can't I do this or why can't I do that, she'd slap me. So to have come that way, pregnant, with that attitude that I'm out of here, you can't stop me anymore, I didn't care what she did. I was out the door. As soon as I got out pregnant, I got myself a little apartment, and my daughter Marilyn was born. Beautiful little girl. But I had absolutely no understanding of the word love because I had never received it. I cleaned her up, I fed her, I bathed her, but I didn't love her. I didn't know how to express love because I had never had it expressed to me. So by the time she was about, I think, 6 months old, I became pregnant again. And that time I had an illegal abortion. It was horrific. By the time Marilyn was 9 months old, the state of New York took her away because I was becoming an alcoholic and getting into drugs. I started to shoot heroin, cocaine, meth crystal, taking pills. I became pregnant again. This time I decided I was going to commit suicide because the first child had been taken away and placed in a foster home. The second child I had aborted in an illegal procedure. Now I'm pregnant again. So I jumped down 30 concrete stairs. I just rolled down these stairs, bounced like a ball to the bottom, laid there in shock, rushed to the hospital. The doctors came in and they said to me, how did you fall? I said, I didn't fall. I jumped. So now they were starting to see this mental illness. My dad was mentally ill. I was convinced I would end up mentally ill too. I went from that abortion to New York City, where I started really getting addicted to heroin. I was beaten there brutally by another drug addict. Finally came back to Buffalo, New York, where I was originally from and growing up and living, and decided, you know what I gotta do? I gotta find power. I know how I can get power. I'll become a witch. So I started getting involved in witchcraft, the occult, Eastern religion, Tibetan Book of the Dead, Buddhism, tried everything, investigated every god there was out there except the one true God. I didn't want to get involved there because there was a conviction of sin and because the man Jesus Christ was dead on the cross to me. By this time, I got married. I was married for probably a year and a half when I discovered I was pregnant. Now, we were both heroin addicts. He was shooting meth, I was shooting heroin. He was shooting heroin, I was shooting coke. We were so messed up. I was walking around with guns, putting them in my mouth, putting them to my head. I was so crazy. So when I finally went to him and said, guess what, we're gonna have a baby. He said, I'm not having any baby with you, you're crazy. You're a heroin addict. You talk with these gargly voices, which were the demons from the witchcraft, and you're gonna have a baby. I don't want no baby. I'm not gonna be a father. I don't wanna be a father. Get rid of it. Moira, I went to the abortion clinic for the third time. When I climbed those stairs, something inside me began to absolutely, I call it full tilt. I mean, it just turned upside down. The abortion took 20 minutes. I walked into that clinic, my body teeming with life. And by the time I walked out, it was an empty, empty tomb. I went back to the house where I lived with my husband. And before he came home, I tried to kill myself. I took vehicles, I drove them into telephone poles, walls. I drove one vehicle into Lake Erie, just put it as far as I could before it stopped in the mud, and sat there screaming. I was suicidal, demon-possessed, addicted to drugs, 3 abortions. My marriage, we were beating each other up like my mother and father had done. It was just a remake of that whole thing, throwing things. I would break things like my mother had. When I got a message that my dad had died, I couldn't have been happier, because I had always had a bad hate and attitude toward my father because of his mental illness and his behavior.
He'd actually escaped the mental hospital when he died.
Did, Monica. He escaped that mental institution so many times, and he ran to North Carolina to the beach there, and he died in a motel room all by himself with his Bible open to the book of Luke, reading, and he had an aneurysm from a fight about 10 days before that. So that's how my dad died.
I didn't know about the Bible.
Yeah, he had the Bible open to the book of Luke. He was all by himself in a motel. Loneliness.
Oh.
You may be lonely, but you're never alone. God will always show up. So my father must have made a commitment in that moment, in all that mental state and all that confusion. He opened that Bible to the book of Luke, and in his quiet moment, dying of an aneurysm, not understanding why all this was happening to him, why he had lost his family, his life, his job, his mental illness, he accepted the Lord and died there in that little motel room. So here I was in New York with all that I have described to you, and the doctor calls the house and he says to my husband at the time, after this terrible abortion, he said, Carol's dying. She's dying of a liver disease. She has chronic active hepatitis B. It's drying up her liver. She has peptic bleeding ulcers that are so bad they're just, if one ruptures, she'll drown in her own blood. She's mentally ill. I don't even want her in my office anymore, he said. Don't bring her here anymore, because she causes nothing but problems with my nurses.